smile as red as blood, from the tale dark and grim. Starring Cole and Ben.
Okay, I am Flumi and I'm going to be playing the bad guy in this story. Hello there, I am Norton and I am going to be playing Gretel in this story.
The next day, the village was all merriment. Tables were set all about with bread and beer and cider, as well as harvest gourds and autumn leaves and other signs of the festive season. The handsome young man stood with the other men, drinking beer from a great mug and laughing about this and that. Everyone went to their seats at the tables, and the master of the town stood and delivered a few fine words. Then the handsome young man stood up, raised his glass to the women, and said they were as beautiful as any women in the world. And then, to everyone's surprise, Gretel stood up. "Can I say something?" she asked timidly. Even standing, she was smaller than most of the sitting adults. "Get up on the chair, honey," one of the villagers told her, so she stood on her chair. "I want to tell you," she began, but then she stopped. She looked at the handsome young man. He was smiling at her. But then she glanced down at his hands that could tear a girl's soul from its body. "A dream," Gretel said. "Just a dream that I had." The villagers murmured with approval. "I dreamed that I went into the Schwarzwald, but as I walked through it and the rain hit my face, I heard the trees whisper, 'Go home, little girl, go home. To a murderer's house you've come.'" Well, the villagers started with dismay, and the young man was staring at Gretel with a very strange expression on his face. Gretel glanced at his powerful magical hands and said hastily, "Oh, it was only a dream. I came to a house in a clearing, and white birds hung in cages from the eaves, and they chanted all together, 'Go home, little girl, to a murderer's house you've come.' But I went inside the house, followed a light into the cellar where I found an old woman wearing a chain of iron, and she told me to flee, that the man who lived there was her son and a warlock, a murderer." The young man suddenly leapt to his feet, and the villagers stared at him. Sheepishly, he sat back down. "It was just a dream," Gretel said, just a dream, and then the man came home," and she added quietly, "and he looked just like you." And Gretel pointed to the handsome young man, who was now staring at her and began chewing on his fingernails like a madman. "He had a girl, and he was dragging her by the hair, and he threw her onto a table and pulled a pure white dove from her mouth and put it in a cage. It was only a dream. And then he took an axe and he chopped the girl to bits." The villagers were now talking to one another, excitedly pointing first at her and then at the young man. Except one piece didn't go into the cauldron. The girl's finger had a golden ring with rubies, red as rubies can be, and he threw the finger in a rage, and it tumbled through the air and fell right in my lap. She paused. The villagers were now silent, waiting for the conclusion of Gretel's tale. The handsome young man's shoulders were rising and falling, and his eyes were wild, and Gretel, standing on the chair, put her hand into her pocket and drew it out again, and "Here it is," she said. She held the bluing finger with the ring still on it in her hand, and the young man leapt from his chair and began to chant the words of a dark curse. But before he could finish, someone came up behind him and knocked him unconscious with a tray of sausages. The oil was prepared, and a villager was sent to find the poisonous snakes. But before the handsome young man could be thrown into the cauldron, Gretel went up to his unconscious body and slipped her slender hand into one of his pockets. She withdrew the tattered, blood-stained piece of twine, put it in her own pocket, nodded to the men, who hoisted up his limp body and threw it into the hissing vat of oil and snakes. As the young, evil man's life came to an end, somewhere deep in the forest, a magic shackle was broken, and an old woman was set free, and around the eaves of a dark house 100 doves burst forth from their cages and fell to the ground, young women again. Gretel returned to the feasting table with all the other villagers, and they comforted her and marveled at her courage. The end.